session. Our topic will be the ERFC program with our Executive Director, Jean Carr, and various consultants. And Dr. Garza, if you would like to begin.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Strauss. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about the why we're doing this study. You all know that after 3 years of, educating our community and talking about the financial condition of the school system and getting more and more people engaged, we would often get questions about ERFC. And oftentimes those questions were based upon myth, maybe in some cases, or rumor, maybe misunderstandings. And so we'd had a number of board members and others that said, we really need to study this. We really need to look at our plans. We need to better understand it, both from policymakers responsible for the school system, but also our greater public. And so because of that, we did ask that the ERFC board initiate a study with the independent actuary to bring you forward some recommendations and maybe just some overview of kind of where we are and what our plan is about. Tonight, you're going to be provided lots of information, and I will tell you, even for our tenured school board members, I don't know of a time since I've been here, at least, that there's even been a presentation on VRS. And so some of this may even be kind of new, or it's maybe a refresher, because there have been a lot of changes to VRS as well. So tonight I would ask the board to kind of just think about this session tonight as just a presentation, information, and then it's going to be late, and I think these folks have an engagement early in the morning, so we want to be cognizant of their time. And we are scheduling a follow-up work session, so there can be a more in-depth conversation and exchange, because these are important. I think you'll find the information so informative and important, but I just want to urge the board tonight, you may want to just listen, like I'm going to, and then we'll have an opportunity at a later, very soon, but at a later work session, to delve more deeply into it. Otherwise, there's so much here, we could be here till midnight or so, because there's a lot of information here. So to tee this presentation up, and we have a lot of experts over here, they're gonna play different parts of the presentation. I'm gonna turn it over to Dr. Ramey to get us started. They're gonna stay seated instead of at the podium, because there's gonna be a lot of passing back and forth during the presentation, so we thought it'd be more easily facilitated in this way. So, Dr. Ramey, it's all yours.
Thank you, Dr. Garza. Good evening. Dr. Garza gave a nice introduction to tonight's presentation. The only thing I would add is that we've had a lot of conversation about total compensation as we've talked through the compensation study. And just one thing for the board to keep in mind is those conversations have centered around the cost when we talk about compensation. Tonight, we're going to talk about the benefit of our retirement plans. And that's why Jean and the team is here, is to talk about those benefits that the plans provide to our employees. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Jean Carr, our Executive Director of ERFC, to introduce the team and get us started.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ramey. Good evening, everyone. I am the Executive Director and Chief Investment Officer of the Educational Employees Supplementary Retirement System of Fairfax County, better known as ERFC. And I have with me tonight here Al-Karim Aladina, who's a partner and consulting actuary in the Retirement and Investment Division of Aon Hewitt Consulting Group. And with him are Adam Reese and Thomas Rand with the PRM Consulting Group. And as Dr. Garza mentioned, last fall she asked us to ask ERFC to facilitate this study, which would benchmark the retirement plans that FCPS offers against the surrounding school jurisdictions, the federal government, and Fairfax County. So we began that work. She also asked us to look at the adequacy of the replacement income that FCPS provides to our employees at retirement. And so we did that work. Aon was selected to do the study because they had done a similar study for Fairfax County 4 years ago, so they were well up to speed on many of the retirement provisions. So our goal today is to present the results of that study and then provide any additional information that you may request on the provisions of the retirement plans. But before we get to that, I am first wanted to at least put up here what our mission statement is. Dr. Garza asked us to include this slide, and I think it's very important to take a look at what we're trying to do. We are trying to enhance the financial security of our ERFC members so that they can have a secure retirement with adequate income to be able to remain here and retire in Fairfax County. And we do have 46% of our retirees that continue to live in Fairfax County. We have over 70% that continue to live in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so they do provide a significant economic benefit to the county and to the state of Virginia. Before I turn the presentation over to Mr. Aladina, I did want to, for the benefit of the new school board members, explain the retirement plans that FCPS offers, give you some history of those plans, tell you how many employees are in each of our plans, and then give you a quick snapshot of the retirement provisions. So this will be a very quick overview of the plans that we offer to our employees. We do offer all three types of retirement plans to our employees: defined benefit plans, defined contribution plans, and a hybrid plan. And we have the definitions here. A defined benefit plan is based on three factors: an equation that depends, the result depends on the years of service that you have, your final average salary, and a multiplier. So the ERFC plan is a defined benefit plan, so is the Legacy Virginia Retirement System, and the plans that Fairfax County offer. They're all defined benefit plans. A defined contribution plan is you have a lump sum amount at retirement, and the amount that you have depends on the contributions that the employee made during his or her career, the match that the employer makes, if there is any, and then of course the investment earnings on those accounts. So in the defined contribution plan, the investment risk is on the employee as well as the longevity risk, whereas in a defined benefit plan, that is not the case. FCPS takes on the investment risk and the longevity risk. FCPS does offer defined contribution plans. We have 457 plan, the 403B, but there is no match on those plans by FCPS. And the last type, the hybrid, which as you might guess is a combination of the defined benefit and the defined contribution plan. Virginia Retirement System now offers a hybrid plan. This was enacted for all employees that were hired on or after January 1st of 2014. When that plan was enacted, they did give employees the option to opt into this hybrid plan, but there was only a handful of Fairfax County employees that opted into the hybrid plan. On the next slide, we can see the membership in each of these plans. The Virginia Retirement System is mandated by the Commonwealth of Virginia. ERFC was created in 1973 as a supplement to the Virginia Retirement System. And then we also list here the membership in the Fairfax County Employee Retirement System. So contracted employees are required to participate in either the combination of VRS and ERFC, or they're required to participate in the Fairfax County Employees Retirement System. The educational, administrative, and support employees are in the VRS ERFC combination. And then the bus drivers, custodian, food service workers, part-time workers are all in the Fairfax County Employees Retirement System. So most of our employees are in the VRS ERFC combination, over 21,000. But we do have a significant number in the Fairfax County Employees Retirement System, almost 6,000. So that's important for you to keep in mind when Aon does its presentation, that we do offer a large number of our employees are in that Fairfax County Retirement System. The provisions of the plans have changed significantly over the years. So you can see in the blue, those are plans that are now closed, but were in existence at one point in time. The ERFC was created in 1973, as I mentioned, as a supplement to the Virginia Retirement System. It was actually the last collective bargaining that was done in the county. the teachers at that time made wage concessions in order to have ERFC created, because you couldn't retire from the Virginia retirement system until you were age 60 with 30 years of service. They wanted to be able to retire earlier, be able to still live in the county, and so ERFC was put in place, and you were able to retire under that system then at age 55 with 25 years of service. By 2001, this school board was really one of the first that recognized that the structure of that plan was no longer working well for it. An early retirement plan was not as beneficial because people were working longer. It didn't work as well for mid-career entrants, for those teachers that left to raise a family and came back, or they left to get further education and came back. So the school board enacted the ERFC 2001 plan, much simpler, much more streamlined than the legacy plan, and so that legacy plan was closed at that time, and all new hires after July 1, 2001 are in the ERFC 2001 plan. So 15 years later, we have about 75% of our employees in ERFC 2001, about 25% remaining in the legacy plan. The Virginia retirement system also undergone significant changes, although their changes have been more recent. So we still have about 2/3 of our employees in Plan 1. Plan 2 was only put into effect for a short period of time for those hired from July 1, 2010 through December 31st of 2013, and then the new hybrid plan went into effect January 1 of 2014. So to reiterate, the Virginia retirement system legacy plans, Plan 1 and 2, are defined benefit, ERFC defined benefit, and then the hybrid, a combination of both. The Fairfax County employee retirement system has also had changes. They changed their eligibility requirements, and new plans were put into effect January 1 of 2013. So Aon will be talking this evening about those plans offered to new employees, which are the plans that are here shown in green. In terms of eligibility, I'll talk about what impact the changes have had on eligibility for our employees. Starting with the Virginia retirement system, the hybrid plan now, the defined benefit portion of that requires you to have the rule of 90, I'm sorry. So your service plus your age has to equal 90. For example, you could be age 60 with 30 years of service, and you would be entitled to a normal retirement benefit. You can see on the left there that used to be much earlier. You could retire at age 50 with 30 years of service. So eligibility requirements were increased significantly with the enactment of the hybrid plan. The same thing occurred with ERFC when that ERFC 2001 went into effect 15 years ago. Eligibility was increased. You can no longer receive a normal retirement benefit with 25 years of service. Now you have to work for 30 years of service to be able to retire under ERFC 2001. And then Fairfax County employees did something similar in increasing their eligibility to rule of 85 from rule of 80. So significant changes in eligibility have been made over the years to these three systems. We also show here what the contribution rates are. So the mandatory contribution rate under ERFC for our employees is 8%. They contribute 5% into the Virginia retirement system, 3% into the hybrid plan. They also have the ability to contribute an additional 4% in that. So that is a 12% of pay contribution if they do the voluntary as well. And then you can see that the Fairfax County retirement system contribution requirements are much lower at 4% of pay for their lower plan, 5.33% for their higher plan. And then the last slide shows the retirement plan provisions. Remember that the defined benefit has those three factors: final average salary, a multiplier, and years of service. The multiplier was also cut significantly in the Virginia retirement system when the hybrid plan was put into effect. So it is 1.7 in the Plan 1. It was cut to 1% for the multiplier in the hybrid plan. And the ERFC 2001 multiplier is 0.8% as shown here. And then you have 1.82 ranging up to 2% for the Fairfax County plans. And finally, the final average salary calculation, 3 years for both ERFC and for the Fairfax County plans, but it was increased from 3 years to 5 years in the Virginia Retirement System Hybrid Plan. So I think the bottom line conclusion that these plans are quite complex. There are several tiers that have already been enacted, and the hybrid plan, relatively new plan, we haven't had much experience with that plan as of yet. And so I'll conclude with our mission statement, which ties back, or with our slogan, which ties back to our mission statement, ERFC and our retiring, feeling confident. We hope that we are able to provide those to our employees that provide a full service career at FCPS. So now I'll turn the presentation over to Mr. Aladina, and he will review the results of the Aon benchmarking study.
Thank you, Jean. Good evening, everyone. So my colleague Adam and I are going to work through this presentation as a tag team, but we won't be going back and forth so you won't get seasick, okay? But what we're going to do is, in the essence of time, on some slides, we will only cover just the key points that we want you to take away from there, and others will spend a little bit more time to help you understand what's going on, okay? So if we start on this slide, really the key takeaway points here are the fact that it's a comparison of the value of retirement benefits that are provided to Fairfax County public school employees versus those that are provided to others in other jurisdictions. Okay? And it's only for future hires, so it has nothing to do with what benefits have been accrued in the past. It's an important distinction to keep in mind. Also, we should keep in mind that what we've done in the study is a comparison against individual jurisdictions, but also an aggregate comparison against the average across all of the jurisdictions that you're looking at. So there's two comparisons that are taking place. And the last thing I will mention is that we have also provided some commentary on the relative retirement adequacy of the benefits that an individual is able to accumulate when he or she retires. Okay, so those are the things to keep in mind. We are only going to highlight the key findings here, but the report has significant other information that you can reach out to. Okay? So if we move to the next slide, you'll see that this is the group of comparators that were selected. There are 7 school jurisdictions, Fairfax County government, and the federal government. And the school systems in Virginia all participate in the VRS plan as well. Okay, so there's a tandem benefit that takes place, whereas the District of Columbia, Montgomery County Public Schools, and Prince George's County have their own plan and don't participate in the VRS. So some distinctions to keep in mind. Later on, when Adam's talking about what the results are, that's something to keep in mind, what's the combination there. Okay? So in order to do the comparison, there are really 3 pieces that we had to look at first. So we had to first sort of come up with a definition of who are the hypothetical retirees. What are the future retirees going to look like, right? That we're going to look at to determine the benefit value comparison. So the first step was to determine that. The second step was to come up with the assumptions that we would use to determine the value of the benefits. And the third was the approach or the method that we were going to use to compare the benefits. So on this slide, you see the 6 different hypothetical retirees that we are looking at. And just for the board's information, these were selected through 3 different sources. We looked at the demographics in the most recent actual report for the ERFC plan. We also looked at the demographic data that was provided by the ERFC staff as to recent retirements and what the age and service of those group of employees look like. And of course, then we also had conversations with the ERFC staff and the trustees as to what made sense. And so what you will see here is a range of retirees from like the first one, which is an individual who meets the unreduced retirement benefits under the VRS system, which is available when you hit the rule of 90, age plus service points equaling 90, right? To the last individual who starts a little bit later in their career, say at age 40, but works until Social Security normal retirement age. An important thing to keep in mind is that employees that will be hired now will most likely will have generally age 67 as their Social Security normal retirement age, the unreduced. They can get it earlier, but it's reduced. Okay, so that's the way we've taken a range. In this tonight, we will just share with you the key findings for the first and the second hypothetical retiree, but in the report there's information on all the rest of them. Okay? All right. So then, in order to determine the value of the benefits, we have to make some assumptions. Okay? So the first assumption we made is the fact that the plans will not change, because we wanted to compare what the benefit plans are today. There's a potential for plans to change for FCPS as well as other jurisdictions, but we left everything constant as it is today. Okay, so it's in essence, it's looking at someone who retires today. The second thing is that, we had to make assumptions about what the compensation was going to be for these individuals, and we've used the current schedule to use that so that it ties into what's going on today. And then we also had to make an assumption for the defined benefit, or I will refer to them as pension benefits. If you want to figure out the value, you needed to have an understanding of what the investment return would be in the trust, as well as all of these benefits provide a cost of living adjustment during retirement. So we had to make some assumptions about that. For that, we have gone back to the ERFC valuation report and used the actual valuation to provide a level of consistency. So the assumptions are detailed there. The second part, as Jean mentioned, there's also a defined contribution or a savings component to the retirement benefits. And so in that plan, as you guys are probably aware, money goes in from the employee as well as the employer, and the greatest value is the investment return that's generated in that account. And so we have assumed that a 7% return will be achieved in those accounts. Now, when Adam's talking about his slides, he will speak a little bit about the sensitivity of that assumption. If it was lower, what would it look like? But we've assumed 7% for this analysis. Okay? And then the last is the fact that, of course, that the employees will make the mandatory required contributions that Jean talked about in her presentation. But we've also looked at what happens if an individual decides to also put in some voluntary contributions of their own and try to maximize their retirement benefits. What might that look like? Okay? All right. So the last piece of consideration before we get into some results is how do you compare benefits amongst jurisdictions? Okay? So if you look at a pension plan, there is a couple of different ways to compare. One way to compare is the cost. What is the cost that one company or a jurisdiction is incurring for their benefits? We feel that that's probably not an appropriate way to compare when it comes to this type of study. Okay? And the reason for that is because I think we believe you want to compare the value of the benefit across jurisdictions rather than the cost. Sorry, I didn't move the slide forward. Thank you, Adam. And that's more easily illustrated if I give you an example. So let's say we had two pension plans. One pension plan that offers 1% of final average pay per year of service, and a second pension plan that offers 1.2% of final average pay, right? So intuitively, if you look at those two plans, the second plan is going to provide 20% greater value, just automatic. However, the cost could be very different from that 20% because the cost is dependent on what is the demographics of that group. How old are they, males, females, how long the plan is in place, what the investment return is. So when you're looking at comparing what the benefit value is being provided to an employee in FCPS versus what the benefit would be had he or she moved to a different school jurisdiction, the apples-to-apples comparison would be to just look at benefit value rather than cost because it neutralizes everything. So that's the approach we've taken, okay? So you will see that we have the value of the pension benefit, and then for the defined contribution piece, it's pretty straightforward. It's the value of the account, which is the value of the benefit. That's what the comparison we've done, okay? All right. So then, since it's almost 10 o'clock at night, we figured you all like math. We'll do some numbers, okay? Actually, on this slide, what I wanted to do is walk you through one calculation, and the reason for that is if we get an understanding of how this is done, all the other examples are done in the same way, so it'll be easier to understand the rest of the examples, and then Adam can take it from there and talk to you about the comparisons of what we see. So what I wanted to do is to show you here what we have is we've broken down on this chart the pension benefit or the defined benefit, which is the first three columns. The fourth column is the benefit that's coming through the defined contribution plan. And then the last column is to what the total value is. Okay? And in the defined benefit, because we're looking at the VRS as well as the ERFC system, we've broken that down into the two pieces. Okay? So I will start on the leftmost column under the defined benefit for VRS, And we're looking here at an individual that is age 60 with 30 years of service. So what would be the benefit that this individual have at that point in time when they're retiring? Okay? So according to the schedule, the person's final salary is $97,791. And as Jean mentioned, the averaging period is 5 years. What that means is that the pension benefit is based on the average of the 5 years of salary, generally just before retirement. Okay? That 5-year average is $91,607. You would expect it to be lower because compensation has gone up over time, right? The benefit multiplier, as Jean mentioned, is 1% of pay. So in essence, for this person, they've worked for 30 years, so they're going to get 30% of that $91,607, which amounts to an annual benefit of $27,482. So if they only had the VRS system and they only had the pension benefit, this is what they would get for the rest of their lifetime. Okay? Before I go further down, I'm going to move one over. Okay? They also are in the ERFC plan. And again, the salary is still the same. It's $97,791, except now it's a 3-year average rather than a 5. So the average is slightly higher because you're looking at the last 3 rather than the last 5 years of pay. So that average is $94,970. The multiplier for this plan is 0.8% of pay. So again, they have 30 years of service, so they get 24% of pay, right? 24% of that 94,000 is 22,793. So this individual pension benefit combined between VRS and ERFC 2001 gets $50,275 a year for their lifetime. Okay? So then I'm going to walk through how we determine the value of that. Okay? So in the first column, under the VRS, that $27,482, if the trust is going to be able to pay that every year for the life of the participant, they need to have a certain amount of money available to pay that. Basically, the present value of that stream of payments. Right? And based on the assumptions that we have, that I talked about earlier, the total value is $374,974. So the $27,482 translates into a lump sum value of $374,974. Now, this benefit is not all paid by FCPS because your plan has required employee contributions. Jean talked about that for the VRS, there's a mandatory 4% contribution per year that an employee has to put in. So what we did is we said every year that person puts in 4%. That 4% accumulates at the trust rate of return. And at retirement, the total value of all the money that that employee has put in with interest is $166,421. So in essence, the employer has paid the difference of $208,553. So even though the participant's getting the full benefit, a lot of that benefit has been paid through employee contributions. Okay? Same logic for the ERFC benefit. We find the value of the $22,793, which is $322,666. The contributions here are slightly lower. They're 3% of pay instead of 4%. But the same logic, you accumulate that over the career for 30 years, and that amounts to $124,816. And that means that FCPS had to pay $197,850. Okay? And then the total of the two pieces is the same logic, $697,640, and a portion of that is paid by the employee, and a portion is paid by the employer, right? So it would be interesting that I would say just about 42% of that benefit is paid by the employee contributions rather than the company, or the employer, sorry. Okay? All right. Let's move over to the right under the defined contribution VRS. Okay? As Jean mentioned, under the VRS, there's a mandatory 1% required contribution on the part of the employee, and you get 1% in return from the employer. Okay? So what we've done there is we said, okay, 1% goes into the plan every year. It earns that 7% return, and at age 60, it's worth $40,000. Okay? And the employer piece is identical because it's the same. The employer is also giving you 1%. All right? So in total, under the defined contribution plan, that employee has accumulated $80,000, right? So if you take the $697,640, you add in the $80,000 that's coming from the defined contribution, the total value of the benefit for that 60-year-old with 30 years of service is just under $778,000, okay? But a lot of it has been paid by the employee, and some of it has been paid by the employer. So that's the breakdown, okay? What we did is we took it one step further and we said, what happens if the individual chooses to maximize the savings plans, the defined contribution plan? As Jean mentioned, there was an opportunity to put in an additional 4%, and you would get some matching contributions back on that 4%. You get 100% on the first 1% and 50% on the next 3. So in essence, you put in 4% and you get immediately 2.5% as a match, okay? If you maximize that, it doesn't affect the pension benefit. It only affects the defined contribution savings plan benefit. And that's why you see that column reflects that, okay? And so there's significant greater value that can be achieved simply by putting in money into the plan. So sometimes you see the total value, if you maximize contributions, is $1,038,000. But keep in mind that if you look at that $1,038,000, $492,000 is coming from the employee's own money, right? It's not that the employer is providing that. So sometimes that part gets lost. The feeling is that the employer is providing the full value when they're not. A lot of it is coming from the employee, okay? So that's conceptually what we've done, and we've also then provided what the annual benefit is as well for the defined contribution plan, okay? So if you're clear on this concept, then I'll turn it over to Adam where he can talk a little bit about the comparisons versus other jurisdictions, okay? Adam?
Okay.
Sorry, you good?
Yep. So there's two numbers in the middle I want you to just remember from what Al was talking about. The $291,000, which is the value of the employee contributions combined for the defined benefit, and the $406,000. We did the same calculation for each of the comparator organizations, so each of the comparator school districts in the governments. And you can see on the far left we have FCPS, and that's where the $406,000, the $291,000. So the employer-funded portion of the benefit is in blue, and the employee-funded portion of the benefit is in red. And here you can see all of the jurisdictions, all of the comparators have defined benefit plans, and they all require employee contributions. And the dotted line is the average excluding FCPS. The Fairfax County government has two plans. We actually average those two, so it's not overweight in the average. And FCPS is above average, and as you can see, so are the DCPS and Fairfax County government as well, and also Montgomery County is also a little bit above average. So that's the defined benefit side. We also did a comparison of the defined contribution plans of the plans that are offered by the other employers. Only 3 comparator employers provide a supplemental defined contribution plan other than VRS: the federal government, Arlington Public Schools, and Prince William County Public Schools. And the chart shows the account balance at retirement, assuming that employees contribute the minimum, that's in the left-hand column, or alternatively, the maximum that receives a match from the employer in the right-hand column. So on the left-hand side, you can see the VRS, the 40,000 and 40,000. Those are numbers that we saw from Al Karim's more detailed calculation. We did these exact same calculations for each of the other jurisdictions based on their benefit provisions, not just for this hypothetical retiree age 60 with 30 years, they're all for 6. But in the interest of time, we're really focused on retiree number 1. So let's put the two together. So here is the combined value at retirement after 30 years of service. Blue is the defined benefit employer provided. Pale blue is the defined contribution employer provided. Red is the employee contributions that went into the defined benefit plan, and the yellow bit on top is the employee's own money that went into the defined contribution plan. And again, same issue, the dotted line is the average. So Fairfax County Public Schools value is above average, along with DCPS and the Fairfax County governments. So this chart shows the source of funding, but I think it's more interesting if we look at the next slide. And here, I get to use a algebraic term. I get to use the word x-axis. So the employer-funded dollars are above the x-axis, and the employee contributions are below the x-axis. And this, I think, helps to tease out some important elements of the comparison, because this shows that the FCPS employer value is just above the average, but the employee contribution is well above the average. In fact, it's the largest contribution. Employees are putting in more than any of the other comparators. I think it's the same as DCPS, but those are the two highest amounts required of employee contributions. So that was based on minimum. Family situations are going to be different. If people have the ability to save, they might put in more money, and certainly if you're going to be putting in money and getting immediate match from the employer, some people would. So this shows the situation if, across all jurisdictions, the employees put in wherever they can to obtain a match. And you'll notice that for Montgomery County and Prince George's County, and also for the District of Columbia, and also for the federal Fairfax County government, there's no yellow. So that's basically saying there's no separate defined contribution plan. And here on this basis, again, it's showing that Fairfax County Public Schools are above average, but I prefer the next chart. It really teases out who's funding the benefit and the benefit comparisons. Again, this shows if you're funding and maximizing the contributions, you're getting a decent value, but a large amount of that's coming from your own money. And in this case, it does show that Fairfax County public school employees will be contributing the largest amount across all comparators. Our full report includes benchmarking results for all 6 hypothetical. I think in the interest of time, we're just focusing on just the 2. And this is a retiree age 62 with 22 years of service. This was one of the statistics that showed up from most recent retirees. So this is maybe somebody who was hired at age 40 and retired at age 62. Again, I prefer looking at this one, and you can see it's pretty much the same story again, that the Fairfax County value is a little bit above average, but their contributions are the largest as well. One observation we'd like to make, when we compare the defined benefit components of the FCPS benefit provisions to the Fairfax County Government Plan C for general employees, and we look at, this is somebody who's retiring at age 55 with 30 years of service. Under the Fairfax County provisions, they can retire at age 55 with 30 years of service on an immediate unreduced benefit. And the benefit value, I think we saw from those earlier charts, was higher for the Fairfax County, and there's kind of 2 features that really feed into that. One of them is this rule of 85 retirement eligibility that Fairfax County has. And then the second one is they have a pre-Social Security supplement benefit. So right on the right-hand side, you can see that the blue bar, which is the Fairfax County Plan C annual benefit, drops down at age 67. That's when Social Security would commence. So the extra benefit above that, that's the Social Security supplement benefit that would have been paid from age 55 through age 67. And then the second part of it is the benefit from VRS couldn't begin until age 60. So you've got a smaller benefit. The only benefit that's beginning at age 55 will be coming from the ERFC 2001 plan. The second element of the study we were asked to look at was income adequacy. Aon conducted a rigorous replacement ratio study, so you don't actually need to retire on 100% on your salary. A lot of your living expenses change as you retire. You no longer pay Social Security taxes and other taxes. So if your income immediately prior to retirement was $90,000 a year, the study showed that you needed to replace 78% of that in order to have the same lifestyle, the same income needs, expenditure will be the same after retirement. Typically, that's going to come from three sources: Social Security, retirement, and then personal savings. And the analysis really is using this as a benchmark. So if we can reach that 78%, then we've got an adequate retirement income. So let's look at our first hypothetical retiree. This is the person that's retiring at age 60 with 30 years of service. So under the VRS, they can retire at age 60 with 30 years of service. They meet that rule of 90. But Social Security, you'll see the column has 0, because Social Security, even if you ask for it early, you can't receive it at age 60. The earliest you could receive it at age 62. At age 62, you might receive an additional 24%. So 24 plus 58. Okay, so now we're getting to above the 78% requirement. So it looks like the FCPS benefits would provide that income adequacy, but you've got a couple of gap years at age 60 and 61 that would need to be funded, and maybe the place to do that is to contribute more than the minimum. The gray bar at the top shows that just the mandatory contributions. The two bars at the bottom show the maximum. Probably wouldn't need to contribute the maximum, because that would produce above income adequacy level. If we look to the second example, retiree number 2, here the chart shows the replacement income for somebody age 62 with 22 years of service. So it doesn't meet the rule of 90 under the VRS hybrid plan, so that results in a reduction in the benefit for early commencement. And even contributing the maximum amount throughout their career, the employee would still fall short of that 78% target replacement income. This analysis is based on somebody whose benefits are just provided by FCPS, and so if they're retiring at age 62, they were hired at age 40, so it's not taking into account any other savings they might have had under age 40. But even so, this is showing it's at the margin just producing income adequacy for that retiree. This is somebody who works 3 years longer. So retiree number 2 is somebody that's retiring at age 62 with 22 years of service. So if that hypothetical retiree were to work an extra 3 years, they would now be at age 65 with 25 years, and now they would meet the rule of 90. So here we see that working just an extra 3 years increases the income from the combined benefits from Social Security and the pension plan, as well as the VRS hybrid plan, to kind of get to that 77% in this case, so it meets that income adequacy. So there's a combination of retirement planning, what age to go out, as well as your individual savings that will, can achieve that income adequacy.
Thank you, Adam. So last couple of slides. So on this one, slide 20, on the key findings, we've sort of talked through them as we work through the presentation. So the first key finding is the fact that, Fairfax County Public School employees do have a higher benefit, value of benefit than other school jurisdictions, except for the Fairfax County government or the district, DC public schools. But they also have the highest contribution. So these are some of the key points to keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is also that in order to have the sort of an adequate benefit that Adam was referring to, you do need to have a full career. And you actually need to retire at a point when you get some unreduced benefit. So if you only work for a period of 5 years or 10 years, you're really not going to get a meaningful benefit, right? And also the fact that our analysis was based on, in the savings plan, an individual earning 7% return, compounded year by year, right? So there's some things that are built into that analysis to keep in mind. But they have the opportunity to retire with an adequate retirement income, so long as they are strategic about when they retire. So perhaps not making the decision to go out at 62 and 22, perhaps waiting a little bit till you're able to get an unreduced benefit under VRS. Also by maximizing savings opportunities that present themselves under the defined contribution plan, because it's a fairly generous plan there with the 4% yielding another 2.5%. Okay? So those are some of the key findings that we wanted to point out. On the last slide, thank you, Adam, we were also asked to potentially just put some thoughts down or incorporate in the presentation as well as the study some next steps that the board may wish to think about, potentially, if there's thoughts being given to potential changes in the retirement benefit program that's offered to FCPS employees, okay? I don't want to say here, or nor do my colleagues here want to say that this is an exhaustive list of any options that you have. You have to sort of make a decision on as further studies is required. We've listed some here, so I'll just quickly go through them. Obviously, the first one is a no change, which is always an option that has to be considered. There was an option that was considered of changing the retirement age under the ERFC 2001. Right now, you can retire with 30 years of service, regardless of what your age is. But maybe you can put in a minimum age 55 requirement, potentially. There are employee contributions that earn interest under the plan. You potentially could put in something that reduces that interest that you provide to employee contributions. That reduces your cost, but keep in mind it also potentially reduces the benefit value as well. We talked about the averaging period. When you use a 3-year averaging period versus a 5-year averaging period, the average pay is higher. You get a slightly higher benefit. So if you went to a 5-year, you would reduce that benefit value. You provide a cost of living adjustment right now of 3%. You potentially could look at, instead of providing a fixed cost of living adjustment in retirement years, instead to provide something that is linked to changes in CPI. Okay? You potentially could do that, but you probably want to consider putting in a cap, because right now CPI is running low, but it could in the future go up again and be too high, right? And then, of course, you could just close off the plan to new hires and just move to a defined contribution plan of some nature only, and not offer the ERFC 2001 for future hires. We are thinking here that any considerations that the board would have would be related to future hires and not existing employees, okay? But if that's the case, keep in mind that cost savings would be minimal at best under any of these scenarios or other things that you put together, which applies to only future employees. It would take quite a bit of time before any meaningful cost savings would be realized. Okay? So that's basically what we wanted to cover on this slide. Is there anything you guys wanted to add? We're good? Turn it back over to you, Jean.
Yes, thank you. We'll entertain any questions that you might have on the two presentations.
Thank you. Very briefly, because we will have an opportunity to have more presentation on this and more opportunities for questions. So if there are very brief questions this evening, Mr. Moon asked to be recognized.
I mean, you don't have to answer these questions tonight, but for the future work session. Oh, by the way, thank you for the presentation. When I was looking at these slides earlier, I had a hard time understanding there are quite a few slides that I simply couldn't understand. But with your explanation, I have a much clearer picture now, and thank you. And my questions go to options for possible future consideration. I mean, you listed, a number of options there. For example, changing a interest crediting rate 5 to 4%, and changing a final average salary averaging period from 3 years to 5 years, and also change the cost of living adjustment for new hires from CPI equal to annual change in the CPI-U index. I don't know what we are using, with a maximum increase of 4%. All of those, I know that whether at the next work session, whether you would be able to show us how those different options, what kind of difference those options would make on the benefit side, and also on the cost side. And how we would be compared to other school districts or Fairfax County government.
Thank you. I have Ms. McLaughlin and Ms. Huff.
Wow, Mr. Moon, we were channeling the same question.
That's just scary.
I know it's scary for you. I really think that's going to be very helpful to us in our work session, is looking at not just the options here, but specifically, I think we recognize that it's very important to remain competitive in the region. So looking at these suggestions and, again, what they would mean for our competitiveness compared to the other school systems and Fairfax County government. In particular, I thought the option recommendation on the cost of living adjustment, again, certainly we have to be mindful of how can we continue to offer the most competitive benefits, but we also know that we're also trying to look at how do we improve salaries. So getting a sense of kind of what's the norm will help with these. I think one of my greatest takeaways from the information you've presented tonight, and I'm hoping maybe we can talk about it some more at the work session, is we've talked so much about parity and equity for our employees compared to Fairfax County government employees. For the longest time, there has not been a sort of consistent application each year of who's getting what percent raises and things, and we're really trying to bring more equity to that from both sides. And yet I'm looking at their retirement benefit charts, and I mean, it's remarkably different. And so I think Dr. Garza will really help our board, again, with our funding authority, the Board of Supervisors, that we are looking at total compensation. It isn't just salary alone. And even though we, in this information here, are more benefit rich in what we offer compared to other school districts, we are still, at least, my very humble layperson interpretation of it, we are not even in the league of the Fairfax County government. So being able to understand why they look so different from us, I want to make sure I don't make any, simplistic conclusions or draw any simplistic conclusions, but that was very dramatic to me. I hope that question makes sense.
I think what you're speaking to is really this information arms you and us when we get the questions from the supervisors and others who sometimes will say, well, your employees can retire at 55 years of age. Well, that closed before 2001. So that's an old, that was changed a long time ago, yet they say, I hear it all the time. Mm-hmm. And so this arms you with some information to show that that's not the case anymore. Well, and I think the employee contribution, the significance, and you all mentioned this several times, how much our employees have to pay out of pocket for the benefit that they're getting is much greater.
Absolutely.
And that I think is really important takeaway as well.
Absolutely, and I want to thank you so much for how your comparison really did look at, okay, everyone's retiring at the same sort of salary point. And then what does that look like going into retirement? And then Dr. Garza layered that on with who put in 4%, who had to put in 8% in order to even get that benefit. So there's a lot here to discuss. So thank you so much. Boy, we've got our homework in front of us.
Ms. Huff?
Thank you. I want to also echo Mr. Moon's question, but even more specifically, you mentioned that most of these options aren't going to obviously yield immediate savings, but I would like a picture over time on some of these options of what kind of dollars we are talking about. This is a longer term discussion we're having. We're not making this decision just for the next year, but what's sustainable for our system. Because I would like to see us take an approach where we do become more competitive with the surrounding counties so that those dollars we're seeing in future years we put into salaries, because that's what we're hearing the teachers want now and the employees want now, so that we can be competitive for what's being asked for. So that was my first thing. And then my second question you could probably, I'm hoping, answer tonight is a couple of the options were to eliminate ERFC as it exists and maybe change over to more of a defined contribution solely, so that we would be able to fund that. The ERFC would be able to pay out the obligations they currently have to current employees who are invested in it if we were to eliminate it.
And I'll take a crack. Sorry, Jean.
We would have to still we have an obligation to those that have accrued service under the system. So you wouldn't have an immediate decrease in the employer contribution that is occurring right now. So it would take a long time before that transition to occur. It takes about 7 to 8 years before half of your employees would no longer be in that retirement system.
So on the option to eliminate,
It's for new hires only.
New hires. So you still
then
have
how are we-
liabilities sitting out there where, employees have already accrued service under the retirement system.
so is the current employees' contributions alone enough to fund on the out years is what I'm asking?
No.
So how would we eliminate it and still fund what?
So that option would be that new employees would no longer be a member of ERFC. So you still have your existing 21,000, you have 10,000 retirees to pay, you have liabilities that exist that still would have to be funded.
So
So
if
it-
we don't have people buying in anymore because the ERFC no longer exists, how are we going to end up paying through retirement for those other 21,000 currently in the program?
Well, we have a trust fund of $2 billion now.
Okay.
And then we would continue to receive employee contributions and FCPS and contributions to fund those remaining employees that are still in the retirement system. So it would take 10 years before you would see that employer contribution go down.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I have one last question. We are sometimes asked about some kind of benefit arrangement that is portable, and I'm assuming that would be a mutual fund and annuity. That would be a 401B something or another. So I guess when we come back, if you could give us a little more information on that as an option for employees who are looking at something that is portable. In other words, they don't plan to stay for 30 years. But we can hear about that later on. That's sort of the TIA CREF.
And that is what the defined contribution portion of the hybrid plan is currently. They can take that
They
with them.
can take that, okay.
And then they can also take the contributions that they put into ERFC and the Virginia retirement system.
So they can take the whole thing. Okay, all right. Okay, are there any other questions? I see none. So we shall have an opportunity to discuss this again.
Yes, we'll work with the chair and vice chair to schedule another work session because this was a lot. But I do think all this is valuable information. I know when I saw it the first time, it was really helpful to me. As you work through this individually, if you have questions, if you wouldn't mind capturing those questions so we can get them to the team in advance of that work session, and we should have a date relatively soon for you to know when we're going to follow up. So thank you all for staying so late, and thank you for your work. We appreciate it very much, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with you.
Great, thank you. We
Thank you.
actually, I think,
Thank you.
understood it. Thank you. And this work session is adjourned. Thanks.
And the meeting is adjourned. Good night.